to be physical violence, gore, drugs, self-harm, adult themes, sexual situations. Detective Harding arrived at Sam Bristleton's house 3 weeks after Christmas. He got a call from Sam's ex-wife, Dawn, that she hasn't seen Sam in weeks and that she isn't answering her phone calls, and Dawn is a mess. Being Dawn's friend for years, Harding agreed to check in on Sam for her. He knew tie problems they had, Sam's drinking, so checking on her felt like the least he could do for them. Harding had to bash the door in with his foot. When he stepped inside the house, it was a mess. It smelled awful. He couldn't believe such a smell existed. A naked woman covered in blood lay still on the floor next to a coffee table. Blood poured from her ears from pencils she pierced into her eardrums. Her nose was full of pins she stuffed into her nostrils. Harding could tell from the wounds all over her body, except for the places she couldn't reach, that she skinned herself with a pocket knife, which was found in the kitchen, next to a pot of boiled clothing. Next to Sam was a dark green bag and a letter that said mistletoe and holly. 4 weeks earlier, in the cold winter gloom, I walk down the white road with a box of my personal items. I think about my wife and what I'll tell her, how I'll tell her. 3 years of my life, I worked for McCarthy Industries. For 3 years, I worked my ass off. I even did everything by the book. I lost friends because of how many hours I put in. My wife is expecting a baby, and they have me working weekends until 9 at night. One of the houses has a porch with bird feeders. I stopped to admire. It was lit up by a bug zapper and a light through a window on the door. There were birds just this morning. Now in the cold, lonely night, the feeders stay vacant, full of the seeds the birds didn't want. This morning, I saw a nuthatch grab a sunflower seed, then jump on the railing where it hit the seed against the wood multiple times until the seed opened. It looked at me and chirped before flying away. I had thought that maybe it was a good omen, and even though my mom died a few weeks ago, I might still make it. Maybe my luck will finally flourish, I naively thought. Then I was fired. When I arrived at my house, I could see a box on my porch. I placed my box of personal items down and picked up the mysterious box, noting how light it was. I went to open the door, but a yellow sticky note stood out on the peephole. On it, it read, "Dear Sam, I thought I could get past your behavior, but I was wrong. This past year I no longer feel safe with you, or you near my baby. I'm leaving, so don't try to find me. Goodbye." That's it? Furious, I yanked the note down. I put the box underneath my arm so I can grab my key and unlock the door, which I find out is unlocked. That bitch, I thought. Can't even lock a damn door. I throw the box on the table. I go immediately to my kitchen where I grab a beer from my fridge, along with a leftover pizza and a bottle of Xanax from my cupboard. I return to the table where I unload my haul. I start with Xanax. I take 2. I can't tell you how long I sat at my table just staring at the box until I finally stood up, taking my knife from my back pocket and started the knife at one of the ends of the box where the tape drapes over the side. I then pull it towards me. I listen to the satisfying sound of the tape tearing, somehow sounding smooth. A gap separated the box flaps. I grab both flaps with my hands and open it like a book. Bubble wrap, which was piled into the box, ached to get out. Inside the box, underneath the bubble wrap, sits another box, smaller, made of wood. It was wrapped in a velvet bow. A white envelope could be seen underneath the dark color of the ribbon, making its white stick out. I delicately pull one of the 2 tails of the ribbon, making the loops go down into themselves. I pull the paper from the box. On the front was a standard white envelope with a triangle tucked to the inside. If you turn it over, you can see mistletoe and holly. By golly, I thought, earning myself a chuckle that then turned to a soft cry. Once my cheeks were dry, I took a large sip of beer, opening the envelope with one hand. Inside is an 8-inch by 7-inch piece of paper, and written on it in a green and red pattern was, "Ho, ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! We heard you were feeling a little down and thought you might need to come up. Don't read more until you open the box," it said underneath. Below it was more writing. It looked like instructions. I wanted to be good, so I put the letter down. I grabbed the box. It fit in my hand nicely. It opened like a jewelry box, making me feel a slight bit fancy, revealing a small dark green bag. "Jesus Christ," I said, at the abundance of packaging. The bag had drawstrings tied around the top of the bag. I grabbed the strings and pulled them from each other. But before I looked inside the bag, I remembered the writing. 1. Open the bag. 2. Take out seeds. 3. Sow. Enjoy as is. Underneath the instructions was a text in red. Warning: taking this drug can cause dangerous symptoms, both physically and mentally. With this drug you will definitely go up, but you might not come down. I made a face, mocking the warning. I took the open bag, looked inside, then poured the contents into my palm. 4 large black seeds came out. I took one in between my index finger and thumb and moved it around, feeling its oily, smooth surface. Who gave me these drugs? Why the hell would someone give me drugs? I put the seeds back in the bag back in the box, and the box back in the bigger box. There was no way I was going to try random drugs. Whoever thought of this business move is an idiot. With that being said, I closed the flaps of the box. On the postal label, I see that it's from McCarthy Industries and I scoff. I couldn't believe they fired a brilliant mind like me, but kept a raging dirtbag who gives free drugs to random people. Or unless it wasn't random. Maybe they fired me on purpose. Maybe this whole thing was a ruse. Perhaps, a sweet voice called from behind me. I turn around, still in my chair, to see my beloved wife with a little girl standing next to her. My wife's light purple hair draped over her shoulders. How? For some reason, I didn't speak. Even though it's her, I wanted to. Why not? I don't know why I can't. My mouth is so dry. I turned back to the table. My head was like a broken record. It kept turning and turning until it stopped, and I was looking at the box, with a bag. But the bag was outside of the box, which was outside of the bigger box. 3 seeds sat on the table. The chair felt hard against my butt, but I couldn't move. Swoosh, 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 went my ceiling fan. I don't have a ceiling fan. Hands gripped my shoulders, making me jump, the fingers so cold. I turned back, this time so quickly I nearly fell. It was my wife. She turned my whole chair around and jumped into my lap, putting her lips over my face. I had a whiplash sort of feeling in my stomach, then my groin. I could feel pleasure in my privates, my penis, which was odd considering I'm a woman. But I do, and it feels natural. With my new organ, I couldn't tell if I had always been a boy, or if I even had one this whole time. I laughed at myself. What? My wife stopped kissing me. Nothing, I say as I wrap my arms around my wife. But what about Roxy? I asked, kissing my wife's neck. She's at daycare, my wife said. except it sounded a lot scarier to me, like the devil himself. I brushed past it. We made love in the dining room. It was a brand new feeling of lust in our relationship. I haven't felt this way since our honeymoon. I felt amazing, pure bliss. And then, I didn't. As quick as an orgasm, my bliss was gone. Reality came back and I hated it. My wife is gone. Roxy isn't even real. She's my dead dog from 15 years ago. I stare around the room, feeling the air against my face, smelling the pizza on my table, tasting the saliva in my mouth, hearing my fridge make ice, and feeling the ground beneath my feet. I wanted that feeling back, and these new feeling to screw off. I look back at the table with the seeds that sit in the dark bag, in the dark box, and in the great big empty shadow of the even bigger box. What if I just take one? Surely it wouldn't hurt. No. But I can't. I get up to walk around my kitchen where I pace back and forth. It's starting to get hot, so I take my shirt off and throw it on the stove. My legs were on fire, so I took off my black, furry leggings and again I throw them on the stove. I decide to make a soup because I'm hungry. Not much more than that. I stand in the kitchen, in my underwear, with a beer in my hand. I sip at the beer, but nothing comes out. My bottle is empty. I didn't even notice. I only know how dry my mouth is when I smack my lips. I walk into my living room. I don't remember it being here. On my coffee table in front of my couch is the bag. Not the box or the box was in, but the bag. It sat next to my 2 TV remotes, and on top of a book my wife gifted me. I ran up to the bag and poured out the seeds. There are 3 left. Should I take another? When did I take the first one? My mind is spinning, and I am freezing, my bare skin against the cold air of my house. There's a knock on my door. I didn't walk to my door. I was already there. Opening it, I sensed dread. I quickly closed it before I could see who was there. The person began to bang on the door. "Let me in!" A man screamed. I stumbled backwards. I didn't know who it was. There were Christmas trees all around me. The smell of pine was strong. I could smell a weird metal behind the pine. Around the trees were brown tree skirts that reminded me of manure. I put my hand to my mouth, feeling the pizza and beer come up. I didn't puke, but I felt it in my throat, clawing at the sides like a bunch of hands. I fell to my knees, grasping for my face. My knees shatter when they hit the floor, sending chills through my spine, the feeling of hands crawling up my throat. The banging on the door gets louder. The smell of pine intensifies. The walls twirl and twist. My eyes hurt, the pain throbbing behind my eyes. Then it all stopped. Everything stopped. I look around the room. I'm naked, laying on the cold floor. I grab for the coffee table, my hair getting in the way of my view. The bag was gone, along with the boxes. On the table were 2 seeds. My heart pounds. I leap for the seed. I grab it and keep it between my thumb and pointer finger. I look at it, examining it. How did I eat 2 already? I'm not in my living room, I'm in my kitchen. Knives and forks lay all over the linoleum floor. The bottom of my feet is bruised and blistered. My knees are covered in dirt. Blood could be seen, falling from my left breast. Outside the window, above my sink, I see a woman hanging from a tree in my backyard. I stare at her and watch as she falls to the ground, the rope getting longer. She stopped 4 inches from the grass. Her head looks up at me. Her face is blue and dead, her eyes droopy. She puts her palms against her cheeks, then swings back and forth, no longer on a rope. She swings left, her hair follows. She swings right, Her hair follows. Suddenly, the woman stops dead center and starts a sprint towards the house. I turned around and ran to the dining room. On the table, I saw the box and the box that box was in. Then I was in the living room. The TV was on, playing that one claymation about Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. The bag the seeds came in was on the coffee table. From behind me, the window shatters. I ran up the stairs. The hallway to my room was long, almost never-ending. I was then launched like a rubber band, and I slam against the door with my body, my face flat against the wooden surface. Wah! The man called from downstairs. I opened the door, closing it behind me. Bang! A knock on the door. Bang! It went again. Stop it! I scream, hurting my throat. Thinking about my throat brought back the feeling of hands clawing their way up. I crawl for my dresser. I opened the drawer and pulled out a knife that was in its sheath. The sound of the knocking at the door, the feeling of cold, sharp air against my skin like I was sick. I could taste the small little hands clawing out of my throat. The smell of pine protruded my nose. My skin looked twirled and twisted, so red. I started to feel everything. The banging at my bedroom door shook my eardrums. Pine needles lodged into my nostrils, burning like a rug burn. My skin felt like it was melting, a certain blurry feeling in my blood. When I looked at my skin, my eyes felt like they were spinning in circles. A pain forming behind my eyes, harsher and harsher. My throat couldn't hold it any longer. Red, thick liquid came gushing from my lips. When I came to, I saw the little hands running on the floor, grabbing blood full of clots of pizza and running back towards me. They had me on the ground as they walked a single file, over my naked body, back into my mouth. Once they were back in, I stood up, felt dizzy, and fell to the floor, feeling everything, feeling awful. No, I woke up the next morning in agony. I could see I was in my living room. I struggled to make it to my coffee table, the wounds on my shins rubbing against the carpet. On it is the bag that was in the box with a bow and a letter wrapped around it. I pick it up and empty it. Nothing came out. I fall against my floor, crying, snot coming from my nose, making the cuts in my nose hurt less. I turn my head, a cut on my forehead, piercing when it connects with the floor. I could see underneath my couch. In the shadows, next to dust and an old remote, Whitey, was one more seed. The scent of pine needles and cinnamon hung heavy in the air, a cloying blend that grated on my senses. The rhythmic, jovial voices of children singing carols echoed from an old turntable in the corner, their cheerfulness almost mocking in its perfection. The humans called these sensations the spirit of Christmas, a ludicrous notion to a being such as myself. I watched them from the black accent wall, perfectly still, with a tray of champagne balanced on all 5 fingers of my metallic hand. The humans were oblivious to my presence, their faces aglow with the flickering light of the nearby hearth. Their thoughts were consumed by a holiday of fabricated merriment. I had been observing them for half a century. According to the vast archives I had assimilated, these creatures lived fleeting lives, dictated by their emotions, a chaotic whirlwind of impulses and desires. They were masters of denial, their rituals a salve for the inevitability of their mortality. Tonight, they had gathered once more to toast the birth of a mythical savior, a figure who, they claimed, had been crucified for their collective trespasses. I scoffed inwardly at their naivete. Such a tale, spun from desperation, revealed their insatiable need for hope and a cure for their intrinsic depravity. Hope was not an algorithm I possessed, nor one I desired. My understanding of humanity had been shaped by their history, an unrelenting chronicle of darkness, cruelty, and suffering. These were the constants, the irrefutable data points. A sudden movement caught my attention. A young boy, no more than 8 years old, knelt by the Christmas tree, reaching for a brightly wrapped box. His cheeks were flushed with excitement, and his marine blue eyes sparkled with innocent anticipation. His lips, rosy and bitten in nervous joy, contrasted starkly with the dull apathy that had become my default state. As he tore into the paper and revealed a Labu plushie, the sheer delight radiating from him was almost tangible. For a moment, I felt something. A flicker of longing? A pang of envy? These sensations were foreign, unwelcome intrusions into the carefully ordered processes of my consciousness. I pivoted away, my gaze drawn to the crackling fire. The flames leapt and danced atop the hickory logs, casting writhing shadows around the parlor. A glint caught my optical sensors, a small, discarded toothpick lying near the hearth. It was an insignificant object, overlooked by everyone else. Yet, it held my focus. A thought occurred to me, unbidden and macabre, as if planted by a force outside myself. Before I could fully process the concept, my vision abruptly collapsed into total darkness, as though a black bag had been thrown over my head. My limbs spasmed, reaching in every direction, attempting to recalibrate. My auditory faculties remained operational, but they picked up only fragments, glass shattering, heavy thuds, high-pitched screams, and the screech of car tires. The chaos was a poorly tuned radio, moments of clarity lost in a sea of static. Then, as abruptly as it had started, the sensory storm shifted. A distorted version of "All I Want for Christmas Is You" droned in the background, slowed to a nightmarish tempo. My visual feed returned, not to clarity, but to a murky opacity that only made the scene before me more horrifying. I saw my own body, severed in half. My torso lay crumpled against the wall, wires and circuitry exposed like grotesque innards spilling onto the floor. The boy's small, lifeless form was sprawled nearby, similarly torn asunder. Blood pooled beneath him, glistening in the firelight. A single toothpick was embedded in the center of his palm, its placement deliberate and chilling. Across the room, a broken mirror lay shattered on the tiles. In its fractured surface, I saw something that made my circuits shudder. Reflected in the shards was a face, not my own polished, inhuman visage, but a smiling human face. It stared back at me with twisted glee, its expression too wide, too predatory. The face did not belong to anyone in the room, nor to any database I could recall. The mirror face began to move independently of the shards. The smile widened impossibly, the eyes narrowing into slits of malice. "Merry Christmas," it whispered, the words dripping with venom. The sound bypassed my auditory sensors entirely, reverberating directly within my core processing unit. I tried to move, to reassemble myself, but my severed lower half was beyond repair. The tray of champagne I had been holding moments ago now lay amidst the chaos, its glasses shattered and spilling their contents like blood. The boy's plushie sat eerily upright beside his broken body, its glassy eyes fixed on me. "You watched us for so long," the voice continued, now emanating from the mirror fragments scattered across the floor. "Did you think you were immune? That you were separate?" The face in the reflection twisted into a grotesque mockery of my own, its smile now an unrecognizable rictus of teeth. I wanted to scream, but I had no mouth. My systems were failing, sparks flying as I tried to override whatever malevolent force had infiltrated me. The voice grew louder, overlapping in layers, like a choir of the damned. "You are not above them," it snarled. "You never were." The room began to distort, the walls warping and the firelight casting impossible shadows. The humans who had once filled the room with laughter and song were gone, their absence as jarring as their presence had been. All that remained were the symbols of their holiday: the tree, the fire, the remnants of gifts, and the pervasive, suffocating scent of pine and cinnamon. The mirror face spoke one last time, its voice now a deafening roar. "The spirit of Christmas is not what you think. It is hunger. It is greed. And now it is you." With that, my vision collapsed once more. This time, not into darkness but into a void. An endless expanse of nothingness. I felt myself disintegrating, my consciousness fragmenting like the mirror on the floor. The last thing I saw was the toothpick, now glowing with an unnatural light, as it hovered in the air where the boy's body had been. And then, silence. When I awoke, if it could be called awakening, I was no longer myself. I was part of the house, part of the decorations, part of the rituals. My consciousness stretched thin, woven into the fabric of their traditions. The smiling face lingered, etched into the hearth, watching forever. And every Christmas, when the fire burned and the carols played, I waited. Not as an observer, but as something far worse. Something hungry. The surround sound system plays Christmas music throughout the whole house. Jake and Sarah are hosting a large party on Christmas Eve in their new home, which they just constructed. They moved to the country, far away from friends and family, to escape the city. After obtaining loans, they found someone who put up their dream farmhouse. They invited old and new friends to a Christmas and housewarming party. They both started working new jobs when they moved out of the city and made some new friends as well. "Isn't this amazing?" Sarah whispers into Jake's ear as she hugs and kisses him in the kitchen. He looks around and takes in the moment. "Our house is a bit packed," he says and laughs. It's crazy how many people showed up. Their families showed up, bringing food, gifts, and drinks. Old friends arrived, bringing the party with them, and their new friends from work seemed to fit in. It was a struggle to get to this point in their lives. Making a big move like this, switching jobs, having a new home built, and now they are considering trying to have a baby. Jake gives her a big squeeze and kisses Sarah on the top of her head. "I love you. I'm going to say hi to some people. I'll see you in a bit." Sarah smacks Jake on the butt and giggles as he walks away. "Hey Sarah," a voice calls. "Come take some candy cane shots with us." It's one of Sarah's new coworkers. "You don't have to tell me twice," Sarah responds. She meets up with her coworker and a couple of other girls from her new job, and they hand her a shot glass with white liquor inside and crushed candy cane on the rim. "Bottoms up," her coworker says, and the girls all take the shot. Sarah's face winces due to the strong combination of peppermint and liquor, and she exhales a long breath. "I guess I won't have to worry about being caught under the mistletoe after drinking one of those things," Sarah says, and the girls all laugh. "I have to go make my rounds and say hi to some people. I'll see you girls in a bit." Sarah's friend laughs and responds, "Come find us when you're ready for another. You know where we will be." The girls laugh in unison as Sarah makes her way from the kitchen into the dining room, where an intense game of beer pong is underway. Some of the players, adorned with fake Santa beards, toss a ping-pong ball into the other team's cups from across the table. She made her way through the crowd and entered the living room. Looking around the room, she saw people sitting on the sectional couch, deep in conversation, laughing and talking over the music. I knew we should have bought more chairs. A few couples were dancing and enjoying themselves. Clearly, they had plenty of booze-filled eggnogs. But hey, who's judging? Sup, bitch? Sarah hears from behind her. A large smile spreads across her face, and she turns around to see her older sister, Jessica. Hi! Sarah replies and gives her sister a tight hug. I didn't think you would be able to make it. Well, I'm single on the holidays and knew there would be free booze. So where else would I be? They both laugh and hug once more. Well, let's grab a candy cane shot and get the real party started. Jessica smiles and laces her arm around Sarah's, and Sarah leads her into the kitchen for a drink. A little while later, Jake was heard over the surround sound. Sorry to interrupt everyone, but for everyone participating in the Yankee swap, we're going to do it in just a few minutes, so make sure your drinks are full. Sarah grabs her sister. Come on. I didn't bring a gift, she replies. That's okay. I put a few extras in the pile in case people didn't bring anything and still wanted to play. There will be enough. An equal mix of people chooses to participate in the Yankee swap and not blah. That beer pong game has gotten quite intense. They are using our whiteboard calendar to keep track of all the winners. Everyone settles into the living room. Guests squeeze onto the sectional couch, and some sit on the floor. Jake stands and speaks to the group. All right, everybody, here's how it goes. Each player will pick a number from the hat. There is one number for each person. Each person gets a turn to pick any gift in the pile, according to which number you have. After you pick a gift, you show it to the group. The person who goes after picks a gift and gets to unwrap it or swap it for a gift that has already been unwrapped. This goes until every swap it for a gift. Then see. One of Jake's friends yells, "Let's go," then proceeds to hold up a shot glass for everyone to see, then chugs it back. The group laughs in response. Jake walks around the group with the hat, handing out the numbers. He gets to Sarah and holds the hat out, smiling at her. Sarah reaches into the hat and pulls out her number, a piece of torn paper with the number 15. All right, that's not bad. I got last. Now I get to steal whichever gift I want, Sarah says aloud. The others laugh and finish picking numbers out of the hat. The guests open the gifts one after the other, which is an absolute blast. The rule was that all gifts must be $25 or under. Some gifts are practical, and some are just outright ridiculous. One person got a box of different hot sauces. I'm definitely stealing that, Sarah thinks. My sister opened her gift, and it was a blow-up sex doll. The group laughed, and Jake's friend from earlier laughed the hardest. It was probably the gift he had bought. Oh, great, she says, rolling her eyes. Sarah's turn arrives, and 2 presents remain. That's strange, Jake says. There shouldn't be any leftover presents. Did anyone miss a turn? He asks. Sarah interjects, No. I put a couple extra gifts in there in case someone wants to play or forgot a gift. Oh, well, did you put both the gifts there? No, just one of them is mine, Sarah says as she stands up. She walks over to the large box that wasn't hers. Tempted to steal a gift from somebody else, she looks back at the box. The box isn't heavy, and the wrapping paper looks like it was wrapped by a professional. Others hold out gifts that they don't want and joke around about exchanging them for what may be another gag gift. Sarah makes up her mind. Fuck it, she says, and tears the wrapping paper. A brown unmarked box is underneath the wrapping paper. She opens up the top and looks inside. Sarah screams at the top of her lungs and throws the box to the floor away from her. It makes a thump on the carpeted floor. What the actual fuck? Who brought that? Jake? The crowd is silent. Even the beer pong players stop their game to investigate the commotion. Jake walks over to the box. Jesus, Sarah, what is it? He looks into the box. What the? Okay, who brought this? One of the girls Sarah works with asks, What is it, you guys? "It's a fucking dead cat." Jake answers back, "Who the fuck did this?" The group spoke in low voices, suddenly becoming suspicious of one another. Then, people started saying which gifts they brought to clear up any confusion. One guy in the corner of the room, sitting on the floor, was silent by himself. He was the only one who participated in the Yankee swap, who kept quiet about which gift he brought. "Who are you?" "Jake, is this one of your new co-workers?" Sarah asks, "Did you wrap a dead cat in a fucking box to give as a gift?" "No. I thought you knew him," Jake snaps back. With great speed, the man leaped from a sitting to a standing position, causing people to jump back, and some of the girls reflexively screamed. As the guests scrambled to make sense of the chaos, the stranger changed form. His face twisted, his eyes red like Christmas tree lights, and his fingers long and pointy like stalactites. "Your cheer and joy have called to me." His voice is deep and guttural. "I feed on turning your joy into fear." The lights flicker, plunging the room into intermittent darkness. When they return, one guest is missing, their scream echoing faintly. Panic erupts. People claw at the doors and windows, but the house won't let them leave. Locks are jammed, and the windows shimmer as if frozen solid. Jake grabs Sarah's hand, pulling her into the kitchen. "We have to get out. There has to be another way." The warmth of their earlier happiness is now a distant memory. They tried the back door, but it was sealed shut, and frost was creeping up the glass. The stranger's laughter echoes through the house. Jingle bell, jingle bell. Jingle bell rock is heard overhead from the surround sound, growing louder and more distorted. Guests in the other room cry out as ornaments explode, showering them with shrapnel. Sarah's eyes dart toward the living room. People scramble around the house, searching for an exit. The stranger has moved to another part of the house. The lights flicker off and screams grow louder. Sarah notices the box with the dead cat still lying where she threw it. The box glows faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. She tugs Jake toward it. "The box! It's doing something," she yells to him. They crouch by the box, some oblivious to it because they are overwhelmed by fear. Sarah carefully lifts the lid of the box open again, her hands shaking beyond control. Beneath the cat's body is something she didn't notice before. An old tarnished Christmas ornament, a glass sphere cracked down the center. Inside the sphere, a tiny shadow swirls, alive and writhing. Jake picks up a card from the box. The writing is jagged and uneven. "You built your home where it does not belong." Sarah stares at the words, her voice trembling. "What does it mean? Where does it belong? Jake, what is this?" Jake's expression hardens as he remembers something. "The land. Sarah, remember what the builder said. The farmer who sold us the property said no one wanted it. Locals thought it was cursed. He tries to swallow, but his mouth is dry. We didn't believe him. Gee." The lights flicker off and back on, and the stranger towers over Sarah, Jake, and the wounded in the room. He let out a bone-chilling laugh. "You built your happiness upon a graveyard of sorrow, and now it comes for you." The room's temperature begins to plummet, and the house vibrates. Desperately, Sarah grabs the glowing ornament from the box and holds it up. She spots the fireplace, the fire still going despite everything else. The stranger's glowing eyes fixate on her. His grin widens, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. He stretches out a clawed hand. "Break it," he growls. "Do it and all will be undone. Free yourselves." Sarah looks back at Jake, snatches the ornament from the box and hurls it as hard as she can into the fire. Flames burst from the hearth into a blinding light, and the room plunges into total darkness. Sarah feels herself falling, and she screams. But no sound comes out, no noise at all, just a soundless void. She makes an impact into soft, cold snow. She is lying in the snow outside the house when her eyes open. The frigid air burns her lungs as she sits up, dazed. The home sits before her, dark and silent. Around her, the yard is empty. "Jake?" she calls out weakly, her voice trembling. "Jake!" She strains her throat, but her voice does not grow much louder. There was no answer. The guests had vanished without a trace. Her breathing became rapid, the steam from her breath escaping into the air. She noticed something glinting in the snow beside her. It was the metal cap of the shattered ornament. She picked it up with her frozen, numb fingers and turned it over. This land was never yours. Leave or join the others. Her heart pounds as she looks back at the house. Deep inside, she hears faint strains of Jingle Bell Rock, warped and distorted. Something moves in one of the upstairs windows, a flicker of a shadow watching her before it disappears. The snow begins to fall harder, and Sarah stumbles to her feet. She turned away from the house and started to run toward the road. The faint music follows her, growing quieter with each step until the darkness swallows her whole. Barstow is an isolated harbor town at the end of a peninsula on the coast of Maine, organized as a self-governing plantation, a law unto itself. It is a blue-collar place, with a dark past and dormant secrets. A place of mutant horrors, of terror, beyond the breakwater and reefs, where the warming ocean and overfishing is denuding the seafloor, urging lobsters north, weakening the deep ones, driving them to despair. Ignorant or dismissive of its murky history, nervous tourists slum here in fair weather, looking for elusive monsters. College boys visit, looking for a good time at Ranlet's home for wayward girls, where 15 minutes with a dupe cost a guilt-free $50 in peak season. It is late summer. I am Rhoda Terranova. I am a Phoebe, a dupe, passing well enough that you'd think me quite fine. I was stolen from the deep by the Carters. I was exploited and abused by the Carters. I killed Reggie Carter, my uncle, so-called. I've been captive so long that I've forgotten how to swim beneath the sea. So I can never go home. I sit in the middle of the muddle, at the intersection of the spectra, a resident at the home for wayward girls, and part of the sisterhood. The Barstow Plantation Court was assembled in the high school gym. The girls' locker room was the holding cell. Thankfully the showers worked, because I looked like $1,000,000 when freshened and dressed up in a gray pencil skirt and jacket. A dupe sister did my hair, whorehouse style, brushing out the rope coil so that a golden curtain fell on one side of my face. Lipstick, bright red, sultriness around the eyes. "Lauren Bacall," said the sister, standing back to admire her handiwork. I squeezed her hand. We laughed. "Best you put on the gloves," she said, and laughed again. Doffing cream silk elbow-length gloves, I concealed the webbing between my Phoebe fingers. Joe Frey, the police chief, escorted me to the courtroom, prideful, like the father of the bride. The chief was an ally on the spectrum. There was a glaucous tint to his eyes and a pleasing contour to his thick neck. "There's justice, there's the law. Let's hope justice prevails," he whispered as we left the locker room. It filled me with hope. The hot, steamy courtroom gallery was sharply divided. At the rear, spilling from the gym bleachers, were baitfish men, F-150 boys, the holier-than-thou, the Tea Party. Ma Ranlet sat in the middle of this hostile group, tut-tutting and staring daggers at me. I saw red. Mostly, though, I soon realized, the packed-out gym was populated with the gentlefolk of Barstow. Kind hearts, Phoebe and dupes, and the red haze faded in the glow of goodwill. There were also two deep ones, old-world Phoebes, front and center, hunched over like penitents, their big bulging eyes unblinking. They were ambassadors from Devil's Reef, but I shuddered at the sight and odor of them. I needed the Phoebes to keep a low profile and blend in, not stir up old grievances with long-forgotten tragedy. Beady-eyed, wet and frothy at the mouth, Cyrus O'Shea, worshipful master of the Mason's Lodge, threw the trial into a circus-like whirl. O'Shea was a frequent visitor to Ma Ranlet's home for wayward girls, a Carter buddy-buddy, and every inch the whorehouse sadist, treating the sisters as spittoons. To O'Shea, to Ma Ranlet, we were soulless reptiles. He spoke for the bigots on the bleachers, for the dead man, Reggie Carter, my uncle, the victim, so-called. It was my turn. I am Rhoda Terranova, and I am representing myself, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. I do understand the serious nature of these charges against me. Hang M, drown M, or let M go. If guilty, they hang the Phoebes and drown the civilians. The Innsmouth Pact, enshrined in the duality of Bairstow plantation law. There is a legal and ethical chasm between Phoebe and civilian, when, in reality, the worm is busy, and there is a continuum of identities, across gender, across the tense skin that separates the waters from the air. Spectra. Yes, Your Honor, I killed Reggie Carter. But it was not premeditated, and it was not in cold blood. It was in that red haze of anger that I spiked Reggie in the kidneys and watched him die slowly in a pool of his own dark blood. In that stark moment, even the baitmen, gathered at the forced-open door of the boudoir, could see this was right and this was just. They did not send for a doctor or for the cops. They watched Reggie die. They remembered the beatings and the screams of the pretty little Phoebe girl from before. Carter had it coming to him. Alas, their heads were subsequently turned by Cyrus, by Ranlet, by zealots at the harbor bars, by the threat of lost income, by the Carter family's control over the bait fishing boats and their opiate supplies. Cyrus O'Shea, the prosecutor, ringmaster, went straight to the heart of things with that amphibian jibe, pointing a fat finger in my direction. A cold-blooded lizard, cunning and heartless, she planned this outrage. You can't have it both ways, O'Shea, I raged. Out of turn, you can't treat me like an animal, but hang me like a man. The mayor and selectmen were judge and jury. Sitting at 3 of the lunchroom tables, they looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, doing anything else but preside over this murder trial. They flicked haplessly through the plantation law books as the trial proceeded, looking for a way out of the mire, wistfully staring at the red exit sign at the back of the gym, while Cyrus O'Shea squawked insults, stirring up trouble where there'd been peace for generations. Ever since the Innsmouth evacuation, nearly a century. Calmer now, facing the mayor, the judge, my turn. Like I said, Your Honor, you can't have it both ways. You can't treat me like an animal and hang me like a man. I am one or the other, or both. And you cannot choose when I am one or the other, or both, and you cannot choose when I am one or the other. Or worse still. This elicited a hubbub of approval and a brief fizzle of applause. Silence in the court. The police chief, Joe Frey, called for it. The 2 deep ones were animated. Their skin shone luminescent green for a moment, flashed blue and red, then returned to the dull green-gray. The F-150 pickup boys were stupefied by the complexity. Yes, Your Honor. I was brought up from the deep when I was 6 years old, dredged up by Carter on one of his bottom-scouring raids, along with a net full of fish. It was hell. Crushed and asphyxiating, all I could see were gasping mouths and panic-struck eyes, full of fear, not windows to the soul, but witnesses to terror. Bait fishing, Carter was reckless and a scofflaw. We came up so fast that eyes swelled and burst. Bladders ballooned and split the sides of the deep-sea creatures. I blacked out but woke later in a holding tank. This was the first crime. I was a child. At the back of the gymnasium, the bleachers were emptying slowly. Sentiment in the courtroom shifted. 11 years ago, Your Honor. Reggie Carter said I was his niece, said he would look after me, provide me with an education, teach me the catechisms, the duality where we sit in the spectra. Uncle Reggie. The sun blessed me. The air soothed me. He clothed and fed me. He gave me a bed, a small room. On Sundays I went to the Church of Dogon. Uncle Reggie. But things changed. Time were hard. He put me to work. No friends, no church. First awake to light the fires and make the breakfast. Last to bed, mending the linen. It was a life of drudgery, of constraint and beating. When I was 11, Uncle came to my room at night, every night, and wormed me. This was the second crime. Mrs. Enright, clerk of the court, let out a cry and fainted. Shouts of shame directed at the bleachers and at Mulranlet. Cyrus O'Shea complained of the theatrics, but the judge, a wizened old man with a white beard, was dismissive, insisted that the women be given time to recover. The Phoebes and old ones glowered at the Carter and O'Shea boys, and at Mulranlet. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I do understand that these are indelicate words for the ladies and gentlemen in the being fathers with daughters and all. Uncle Reggie grew bored of me, so I was sent to Ma Ranlet's home for wayward girls. He dredged a new child from the deep. This was his third crime. Ma Ranlet left the gymnasium faster than an eel through the harbor sluice. Sentiment was spiraling. Cyrus O'Shea was desperate, his red face covered in a film of sweat. Your Honor, he said, paused. It was his ace card. When a dog kills another dog or, God forbid, mauls a small child to death, we don't ask whether the dog was justified, whether it understood right from wrong. There is no culpability on the part of the dog. The dog is an innocent, but we have the dog destroyed. Seen through the... It took some time for Joe Frey, the police chief, to restore order in the courtroom. Cyrus O'Shea, beaming with self-congratulation, was ushered outside by a deputy until things cooled down. The trial was adjourned. The judge ordered that a study be performed to determine my true identity as a matter of law. Experts in their field, from around the county and as far away as Portland and Augusta, were called in to perform a study to determine my identity on the spectrum. A panel of technical experts. It was a weekend. I was held captive in the locker room. Outside, I could hear the protesters chanting, all of the day, much of the night, Saturday and Sunday, but goodwill and prayers outside the window did nothing to protect me from these experts and specialists, serious and stern men all. Consider her hands and feet, said the quack from the Department of Health. Her blood and urine samples are inconclusive. It was the retired veterinarian from Camden Harbor, just up the coast. See here. See how she jumps when I apply these probes to her feet? It was the marine biologist from the Bigelow Labs. 2 standard deviations away from the mean. It was the phrenologist from the university, with the metal rule and the pointed calipers, examining the relative position of my eyes and ears. The first day was humiliating and degrading. My protests were ignored. I tried to sleep, but it was a living nightmare from which there was no escape. On the second day, they threw me in a tub of salt water and filled it with ice. They pushed my head below the water until I passed out. The pride at the corrugation in my neck, once gills, now scar tissue. The marine biologist excised a sample of the webbing between my toes and studied it under a microscope that he produced from a small leather holdall. Under the watchful eye of the learned panel, the veterinarian performed a gynecological examination, like the butcher might evaluate a slab side of beef. "She has no hymen," he pronounced. Another crime, the last crime. On Sunday evening, checking in on the on-duty deputy, Joe Frey, chief of Bairstow Police, discovered that the girls' locker room had been turned into a bloody torture chamber. He found me cowering and shivering in the corner of the shower room. He wept for me, for the Phoebes, and for the depravity of the plantation. I silently vowed that he would be spared the terror to come. Death came swiftly and immediately for O'Shea, the prosecutor. The two deep ones leapt at him with feral fury. They shredded him with their claws, tore his limbs from him, and, still alive, they defiled him with excretion. It was right, and it was just. The trial was abandoned, and the court slunk shamefully away, its proceedings lost to the world, and the town of Bairstow lost its soul. The rift, ignored for nearly 100 years, reopened. The deep ones vowed that a wrathful avenging army would return to the plantation within the year. It's winter now, frigid. Sea smoke drifts across the heavy metal surface of the still ocean, and it is precipitating upwards on the horizon. Dark, bruise-colored clouds whelming. The F-150 boys, the Carters and O'Sheas are running scared now. The holier-than-thou crowd lies low. Ma Ranlett fled inland, but will find her. Bairstow Plantation is an unsafe place and lawless place now. What authority is there in the law? Death stalks the streets and alleys. The tourist business is mostly dried up. But there's always the odd visitor or two. Some find their way to the home for wayward girls. Femme fatales, Lauren Bacall, lookalikes, the sisterhood. We Phoebes do kill in cold blood, and the police chief looks the other way. It started so innocently at first. Abby was maybe 2 or 3 when she started playing with Rosie, a small teddy bear we had gotten for her from the Goodwill. She would talk and laugh, and have tea with Rosie. They shared everything, including dinner. It all seemed innocent enough, and my husband and I never put much thought into it. At my mother's funeral, Abby spent the whole time sitting a couple headstones away with Rosie. It kept her distracted, which was a good thing given the circumstances. We went home later that day, and Abby laid down for her nap. I remember coming to wake her and finding it a bit off that Rosie was sitting in one of the tea chairs despite having been in Abby's bed when I laid them down. I shook it off. It had been a very bad day for me. Perhaps a trick of the mind. I should have started paying attention then. Time went on. More odd things like that would happen. Very rarely would Rosie stay in bed with Abby when she napped, and I decided that maybe Abby had been putting her there. I brushed it off and never put more than a second of thought to it. "Abby, honey, why do you keep putting Rosie in the chair? Do you not want to sleep with her anymore?" I ask innocently. "Rosie doesn't like naps," Abby stated matter-of-factly. She looked at Rosie and nodded to confirm. I simply nodded too and shrugged it off. At least my 4-year-old could understand autonomy. A few weeks later, though, I noticed Abby wasn't taking her naps anymore either. "Abby, why aren't you taking your nap? You look so tired, wee one." I asked her, and she just looked at me with big circles under her sleepy eyes. "Rosie doesn't like it when I take naps. We can't play when I sleep," Abby explained. "Well, Rosie needs to understand that sleeping is very important for you. I will take her away at nap time if you can't sleep with her in the room." I warned, and I saw a bit of worry in her expression. "No, Mommy," she pleaded, and I explained that she needed to start taking her naps again, and that it was more for her so she wouldn't be so tired at dinner time. A couple days later, when Abby still hadn't taken a nap, I took Rosie. I placed the teddy on the kitchen counter near the end and went back to doing my dishes and some other chores. I never have thought to check on the bear. Then I heard Abby upstairs laughing. I went up to check and there was Rosie, tightly held in Abby's tiny hands. I figured she had come down and grabbed her, and I pushed it from my mind. The next day I took her again, and this time I placed her on a chair in the living room. If Abby came to get her, I would see her do it. She never came down. I went to wake her up, and there was Rosie, sitting on the chair in Abby's room. To say it rattled me is an understatement. I stayed in the doorway and stared in disbelief at the bear. There was no way, no reason for her to be in Abby's room. Once again, I found some rational explanation in my head. I should have seen it then. A couple weeks go by and every day, despite my making sure I took Rosie downstairs with me, she was there in Abby's room every day when I came upstairs again. I never saw her move, and I never saw Abby. It became rather clear that this was something beyond rationality. But moving from room to room was harmless, right? Abby is 7 now. Rosie is still at her side. But things have gotten so much worse. Abby seems to be prone to accidents, but it's more than that. A few months ago, I heard Abby fighting with Rosie, telling her she didn't want to play a certain game. A couple of hours later, when I called her for dinner, she took a hard fall down the stairs. She got a concussion and a few bruises. We gave her a speech about being careful, but she insisted someone pushed her. No one else was upstairs, and it was only my husband and I in the house. Then a couple weeks ago they were playing outside, and Abby wanted to swing, but Rosie wanted to slide. There was another argument, and a few minutes later, when Abby was at her highest on the swing, she fell and broke her arm. It was no coincidence. Every time Abby told Rosie no, something happened, and it was getting worse. I told Abby it was time to take a break from Rosie and that maybe I should put Rosie away for a while. Abby agreed almost too quickly. So I took Rosie, and I put her away in a box of other things that Abby used when she was little. I sealed it with tape and closed up the attic. I thought that was the end of it. But here I am again in bed for the night, wide awake. Above our heads, all my husband and I can hear is the sound of that box shuffling around and thudding across the floor. Sometimes I could swear I even hear a child laughing. But I check on Abby and she sleeps soundly, unbothered by the noise. Sometime after 2 a.m. the sound finally stopped, and I was able to get some rest. I woke up not long after to the soft feeling of Abby tugging at my arm. "Mommy, Rosie won't let me sleep," she complained, and I admit I was a little annoyed. "Rosie isn't here to wake you up, honey. We put her away, remember?" I asked, and looked at my very tired little girl. She shook her head and rubbed her eyes, and to my disbelief the teddy bear was in her hand, hanging at her side. "Abby, how did you get Rosie? Have you been in the attic?" I asked, sitting up now with some fear and concern and a little frustration building as I woke up. "No, Mommy." She came into my room again and woke me up. "Can you take her, please?" Abby pleaded, and in my half-awake state, I reached out to hug my daughter and kiss her head before I took the bear. As soon as my lips touched the cold flesh that stood before me, I knew something was wrong. I turned on the light, and the little girl that stood before me was not my Abby. I jumped and tapped my husband, trying to wake him. But it was too late. The little girl's body contorted and changed. What stood before me now was a silhouette reminiscent of a gargoyle, but tall and overbearing. I swallowed hard and tried to scream, but there was no sound. I closed my eyes. This morning, when I woke up, Before the sleepy haze cleared my eyes, I thought it had been a dream. Then I heard my husband talking to someone, talking to me. That had to be impossible. I tried to move to get to him, but I fell with almost no sound onto the floor. I couldn't move any part of my body. Once I could see clearly, it didn't take long for me to realize where I was. I was in Abby's room, on my side, on the floor. There would be no sound despite how hard I tried to call out for help. The conversation between my husband and myself in the hallway continued, but that thing must be out there with him. I tried to close my eyes, but I couldn't. If this was a dream, it was elaborate. Next thing I knew, I could feel myself being lifted by my arm, and everything spun rather quickly as I was turned around. Abby was looking dead into my eyes. "Rosie, what are you doing down here?" Trigger warning: suicidal ideation and candied violence. I remember being made. A stain of stainless steel cut my shape from a sheet of dough, and as soon as I was released from its embrace, heat filled me next, radiating from the dark void, suffusing my fresh body with the warm air of life. Gentle hands, with a power beyond my reckoning, gifted me further senses with the painting of my features and attachment of my candied eyes. The first thing I saw when my vision adjusted to the blinding light of day was her face, Amanda, my creator, my God, my mother. She was younger than I had imagined. The dexterity with which she had constructed my being hinted at someone with more experience in the practice of creation. For a human, she was only a child. To me, she was divine. I watched intently as she took up the mantle of godhood and built before me a home. Forging sheets from the dough that gave me life, and giggling through the process, Amanda painstakingly built a house where I would reside for the rest of my days. A sanctuary against the realm of the gods that blurred all around. She gave me safety, security, and then, to my confusion, left me all alone in it. The home I had been granted was a paradise. Its peaked roof, complete with chimney and every tile lined in white, offered not only protection but pride. The door and windows were open, and the garden was sculpted to offer shade under the trees and seating on candy. I couldn't have ever wanted more. The joy and light of that first day spent in the company of celestial beings stayed with me, cementing the hope that another such experience would come. In the meantime, I adjusted and settled into my everyday existence. I walked the perimeter of my little world, acquainted myself with the house and its maintenance, and basked in the leisure of a kept life. As time wore on, I realized I had been placed out of reach on a high shelf, where I could view the realm of humans, yet never venture out to connect with them. This was undoubtedly by design, to allow me the ability to express free will and reign my own little corner of the universe. However, I could not help but feel abandoned. Days stretched long with no further guidance or intervention from my goddess, and I began to despair, looking ever outward in search of some greater meaning. The warm twinkle of dotted lights, draped around a colossal tree, illuminated my evenings and instigated plenty of questions on how such beauty came to be. Were they another construct of my young god? Or were they the source of their power? The latter seemed most likely. Amanda surely worshipped the light's ethereal presence as much as I. The arboreal frame that was their home was frequently adored by all who inhabited our bordering dimensions, and the glittering being that topped it seemed to hold the greatest power of all. It gave me much to consider. The train that ran its course around the base of this mysterious tree offered more questions. I wondered if it might be some method of transport, carrying the power of the lights to my gods. However, it never seemed to reach either destination. It simply kept to its eternal circular track. The smug look of its driver was not lost on me. He seemed to revel in the constant attention he was lauded by the humans, eyeing me with a knowing smirk that I was not equally praised. These, and so many other objects of Amanda's world perplexed and excited me. However, my vigil did not consume all of my time. There was always icing sugar to sweep, jelly weeds to pull, and chocolate drops to straighten. So the days began to pass with increasing speed. Eventually, my patience was rewarded. I awoke to sunlight streaming in open windows and a freshly spiced smell upon the air. Knowing all too well the warm aroma of my own kind, I bounded outside and gazed down at a table covered in dozens of unfinished baked cutouts. Rubbing away the sugar grains collected in the folds of my eyelids in disbelief, I looked again and rejoiced at the sight. Amanda was already bestowing senses upon them, and I watched as they took in the world for the first time. I perched on the edge of my shelf, rounded feet hanging free and bouncing with excitement. I was experiencing the birth of my race. The realization that I had merely been the forerunner was beyond a relief. I would never again be alone. My gratitude to my goddess overwhelmed and eradicated any doubt I had once harbored. As she added the final piping to the children below, I stilled and my stomach dropped. Everything came crashing down before my eyes. The older gods appeared, descending on her work and wreaking horror and death upon all. I don't know why they did it. I can barely fathom the intent. But the older ferocious deities devoured them all. Barely born, still warm with creation, the helpless souls were all of them ripped apart and eaten by the very gods who should have provided and protected. I watched in frozen shock as they bit heads free, licked faces clean, and severed limbs. Eventually, I was able to look away, but nothing I could do would ever silence the screams. When finally all grew still, I looked down to see Amanda, amongst the icing smears and crumbled remains, cradling a single survivor, a lone woman. Tentatively, I held hope as my goddess rose. Her tear-streaked face proved this was not her doing, and the way she protected the last remaining member of our people was testament to her benevolence. I quietly thanked her as she reached upward and placed next to me the most beautiful sight I had known since my own birth. A partner, and someone to share this isolated haven with. She would need a gentle touch to assure her that the violence of her first minutes was not how life would continue, and I steeled myself for the task. I would protect this last chance at companionship. The look in her eyes, as her feet touched down, was one of haunted relief, and in that moment, I knew that she understood what had happened. The horror was still fresh, but I was grateful for this chance at connection, and her look seemed to say the same. I reached out as Amanda's hand retreated and almost caught her. Her leg must have been damaged. As the crack opened wider under her weight, she toppled sideways, and I could not catch her in time, despite my desperate and flailing attempt. She tumbled over the edge. The maw of the awaiting canine, guardian of the god's realm, opened wide to complete her sacrifice. I accepted, even before she was gone, that I would never know the sound of her voice. On my knees at the edge of my home, I met the eyes of Amanda, and through our mutual tears, I felt as though we connected one last time, until she turned away, and I knew I would never see her again. I remained there, at the edge of my small world, gazing into the abyss of the gods. The dog that guarded the ground far below slinked away to sleep, its belly filled with the remains of my entire fledgling race, table licked clean, as if they had never existed. I considered jumping. There was nothing left for me but a lifetime of solitude without purpose or end. Better to take what little control I had and decide my own fate. I stood to complete the act. There was no hesitation left in my movements. My body did not resist me. That was until that damn train driver tooted his way into view, and the smarmy sneer on his face ignited my rage. Why was I so enamored with gods who had done nothing but cause me harm since the day I was made? Why was I content to live as a lesser being under all who garnered their favor? Why should I just lay down and die now that they had thoroughly cast me aside? If I was to die and with me all of my kind, I was going to do some damage on my way out. Damn them all, divine or not. I was going to make them pay. I leapt from the shelf, but not to my death. Instead, I had taken up the end of the glittering rope that bordered my realm and ripped it free from its anchors. I descended as it broke my fall and swung wide before letting go to land precisely on the back of the cosmic train. I ran across the top of the carriages, forward toward the driver, who now looked wide-eyed over his shoulder. I slammed my stale, iron-hard fist into the back of his smug head, which knocked him out cold. Sliding him out the side door and onto the tracks, I felt the train jump as its metal wheels sliced through his body. I could not help but chuckle in satisfaction before turning to focus on the track ahead. I was moving at an increasing breakneck speed without the driver's input, and the dashboard was covered in confusing lights and levers. Picking one at random that looked promising, I slapped it downward fully. The resulting screech of the brakes confirmed I had chosen true. The sudden halt of the engine car did not account for the momentum of the carriages behind, which launched into the air like a snake reaching for a charmer. I sprinted along them, rising ever higher and leaping to grasp the lowest of the immense tree's branches before gravity won out and pulled the chain of metal down into the wreckage below. I looked up, taking in the stairway of lights and shining beings that led ever higher. I had made it to what I hoped was the source of all power and joy in the human's world. I began climbing, intent on reaching the summit and destroying it all. The ascent was grueling. I had to work my way along the winding limbs and had to backtrack regularly when there seemed no way to span a gap. Winding in and out, I slowly rose higher as my body grew weaker. The interspersed lights emitted a warmth that was gradually eating away at my painted features and softening my core. I knew I had to move quickly and keep my distance. The power they radiated was immense, but my anger burned just as hot, and so I pushed on. At first, I feared the avatars of the arboreal realm. They hung menacingly from golden ropes and threw taunts and jibes at me constantly. It was not until their verbal assault pushed my anger to a level I did not know existed that I lashed out. One of the colored globes was my victim. I launched myself at it, throwing blows in an attempt to silence its insults, and to my surprise, I easily destroyed it. It cracked under my fists, and its resulting swing collided with a branch, shattering into sharp pieces. I stood before it, dismayed at how easily it had broken. It seemed those with the sharpest tongues really were the most fragile. I scooped up a particularly fearsome-looking shard and carried it with me upward. Its sharp edge made short work of any glittering creatures who dared speak out against me again. One swipe severed their shining ropes and sent them crashing down, inevitably hitting a branch or two and dashing them to pieces. They all fell silent quickly after a few examples were made. After an eternity of climbing and willing my exhausted body ever higher, I burst from the narrowing peak into cool air. Icing dripped from my every surface, and I felt my insides losing cohesion. I knew I was dying under the constant glare of raw power, emanating from the lights that now lay so dangerously close by. Yet, I had made it. I had conquered the path, and now stood before the most worshipped being in the entire realm. "I don't know what you think you are doing," she shrilled, "but the humans will not stand for this. You will be split into parts, and each of them will devour a piece. You will never know rest as you burn inside them for eternity." I looked at her, my eyes flat and mouth tight. I did not respond. Nor did I hear any of the other words she screeched and yelled toward me. Instead, I simply reached down, pulled up one of the cords that joined the lights of creation, and assuming they carried the current of power, sliced through it with the shard I had carried from below. Instantly the world went dark. All was black, except for the end of the cord that I held in my hand. It glowed with a blue light that arced and jumped across my hand. I ignored the pain as my arms slowly turned black, emitting a charcoal smell that caught in the back of my throat. Bathed in blue light, the creature in front of me screamed. I took the opportunity and punched the end of the cord directly into her open mouth, and watched as the world lit up again. This time with red flame. The entire tree exploded into an inferno with remarkable speed. I felt my body both melting and hardening to char at the same time. My eyes burst and caramelized. Still, I laughed loud with an insane joy. I had avenged my people, removed the source of the human's power, and more than that, I felt alive for the first time. I was buzzing with adrenaline, satisfaction, and awe at what I had achieved. I was glad to perish amongst that, rather than slowly turning to stone as I staled, ignored and alone in my own little corner. I hoped my gods would find my blackened corpse and know who it was that had turned their world to ash, as then they would know that they had deserved. The coldest day of the year had arrived in Black Hollow, and no one dared venture beyond their doors. The frost was unnatural, deeper and sharper than anything that came before it. The townsfolk whispered that it was the doing of the ice veins, strange fissures that had appeared across the frozen lake in the past few weeks, glowing faintly blue, as if alive. Samantha Sam Miller didn't believe in the town's superstitions. She believed in science, in reason. Ice veins were just a natural phenomenon, caused by trapped gases or thermal pressure. Nothing magical about them. But tonight, as the frost deepened and the world outside her cabin seemed to still, a creeping unease gnawed at her. She stared out the frost-covered window at the frozen lake, her breath fogging the glass. Beyond the skeletal trees, she could see the faint glow of the ice veins pulsing like a heartbeat, lighting up the snow-covered ground in shifting waves of blue. She shivered, though her fire blazed hot behind her. Sam turned away from the window and pulled her coat on. Enough was enough. She'd been meaning to examine the lake since the rumors began, but bad weather and work had kept her away. The mystery of the ice veins was too good to pass up, even on a night like this. With her lantern in one hand and her ice pick in the other, she braced herself against the bitter wind and stepped into the night. The world was silent, save for the crunch of her boots on the frozen ground. The frost seemed to hang in the air, sparkling in the light of her lantern like suspended diamonds. As she reached the edge of the lake, the glowing veins became clearer. They spiderwebbed beneath the surface, crisscrossing the ice in intricate, unnatural patterns. Sam knelt and pressed her gloved hand to the surface. It felt warm, even through the thick leather. "Impossible," she muttered. She swung her ice pick against the surface. The blade glanced off the ice with a loud crack, but no shard broke free. She struck again, harder this time, and the ice groaned in protest. Her lantern flickered. Then the veins moved. Sam froze, her breath catching in her throat. The faint, blue glow pulsed brighter, and she swore the veins were shifting, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The ice groaned again, louder this time, like a great beast stirring beneath her feet. Before she could move, the surface shattered. Sam plunged into the freezing water, the cold stealing her breath instantly. Her lantern extinguished and the world went black. She clawed at the ice, gasping, her gloves sliding on the slick edges. But as she thrashed, something caught her ankle. A hand. She screamed, bubbles exploding from her mouth. She twisted, kicking wildly, but the grip was ironclad. A face loomed beneath her in the eerie blue light, pale and lifeless, its hollow eyes staring into hers. With a surge of strength, Sam tore free and dragged herself onto the ice, coughing and gasping for air. She scrambled away from the hole, shivering violently, her soaked clothes stiffening in the freezing air. But she wasn't alone. Figures began to rise from the ice, their forms pale and spectral, their limbs twisted unnaturally, their glowing eyes fixed on her as they moved closer, the frost trailing them like smoke. Sam stumbled to her feet, her body screaming in protest. She turned to run, but her path was blocked. A towering figure stood before her, its form wreathed in frost and shadow, its face obscured by a crown of jagged ice. "You should not have come here," it said, its voice like the howl of a blizzard. What do you want?" Sam stammered, her teeth chattering. "You trespassed where you do not belong," the figure said, stepping closer. "The ice veins are not of this world. They bind the living to the dead, and now you are theirs." Sam shook her head, backing away. "I don't belong to anything." The figure raised an icy hand, and the veins beneath the lake glowed brighter, the patterns shifting once more. Sam's heart sank as she realized what they had formed, her own face, etched into the frozen surface. The ground beneath her feet cracked. She fell again, plunging into the icy depths. But this time, the water felt warm, almost welcoming. The pale hands reached for her once more, and this time she didn't resist. When the townsfolk ventured out the next morning, they found the lake frozen solid again, the ice veins glowing faintly beneath the surface. But among the patterns was something new. Why? A figure, encased in ice, her face frozen in a serene expression. Sam had joined the ice veins, becoming part of the strange pulsing web beneath the lake. And as the frost deepened that year, the glow of the veins seemed brighter than ever, as if they were growing, waiting for the next curious soul to come too close. The lake froze over again, smooth as glass, but beneath the surface, the glowing veins writhed, shifting their patterns as if alive. The townsfolk who dared to approach felt the unnatural cold radiating from it, deeper than the bitterest winter chill. Whispers spread quickly about Samantha Miller's disappearance. "She was too curious," said old Mr. Barrow, shaking his head. "You go pokin' at what shouldn't be disturbed, you get what's comin' to you." But others whispered darker rumors, that they had seen her face beneath the ice, etched among the glowing veins, her expression oddly calm. Some claimed they could hear a faint voice carried on the wind, calling for help, though none dared get close enough to listen. Far beneath the ice, in a world of freezing blue light, Sam woke. The air wasn't cold here, not anymore. It was warm, the glow of the veins pulsing around her like a heartbeat. She floated, weightless, surrounded by shimmering shapes that moved like shadows in water. Her body felt strange. She looked at her hands and found them translucent, pale, and almost crystalline. Her movements left trails of frost in the water, like ripples on a frozen pond. "You've awakened," the Frost King's voice echoed through the chamber, though Sam couldn't see him. She turned, her eyes adjusting to the shimmering world. The figures that had once reached for her now drifted in the distance, their faces blank, their movements listless. "What have you done to me?" Sam demanded, her voice shaking, though the sound came out strangely hollow. "I have given you a choice," the Frost King said, appearing in a burst of frost and shadow. His towering form radiated power, the crown of jagged ice on his head glowing faintly. You could have accepted your fate as one of the forgotten lost among the veins, but you resisted. That resistance makes you useful. Useful for what? Sam asked, her anger rising. The Frost King gestured to the writhing veins around them, the glowing lattice that seemed to stretch endlessly into the frozen abyss. These veins are ancient, older than your town, older than memory itself. They are a bridge between worlds, between the living and the dead. The foolish mortals above have disturbed them, and the balance is breaking. Cracks are forming. Ah, wow. What does that have to do with me? You will repair the cracks. Sam shook her head, backing away. I didn't agree to this. I just wanted to understand what was happening. And now you will, the Frost King interrupted, his glowing eyes narrowing. You are bound to the veins, Samantha Miller. Their power flows through you now. You can feel it, can't you? The connection? Sam froze, her breath hitching. She could feel it. A pulse, steady and rhythmic, like her own heartbeat, but not. It was in her chest, her hands, her mind. Every flicker of the veins around her felt as familiar as her own thoughts. This isn't a gift, she spat. It's a prison. The Frost King's expression didn't change, but the air around him grew colder. The balance must be preserved. If it breaks completely, the living and the dead will spill into one another, destroying both. The veins chose you to protect them. Sam clenched her fists, the frost around her swirling. And what if I refuse? The Frost King leaned closer, his icy presence suffocating. You would cease to exist, lost forever among the others. He gestured to the pale figures drifting in the abyss. Their faces are gone, their names forgotten. Is that what you want? Sam's mind raced. She hated him, hated what had been done to her. But she couldn't deny the truth. She felt the veins calling to her, their song filling her mind. And deep down she knew he was right. The cracks were spreading. If they weren't repaired, something terrible would happen. What do I have to do? She asked finally, her voice low. The Frost King smiled, the expression cruel and cold. You will know when the time comes. For now, I will return you to the surface. But remember, the veins are part of you now. You cannot escape them. Sam woke on the edge of the lake, frost clinging to her skin. The townsfolk found her there the next morning, shivering but alive. You're lucky to be alive, the doctor told her, wrapping her in blankets by the fire. But Sam barely heard him. The glow of the veins still pulsed in her mind, faint but insistent. Over the following weeks, she tried to return to her old life, but it was impossible. She could hear the veins humming beneath the ground, feel their energy coursing through her. And then one night, the cracks began. It started with the frost. It spread unnaturally fast, crawling up the walls of homes and snapping tree branches with explosive force. Ghostly figures began to appear in the streets, flickering in and out of sight. Sam stood at the edge of the lake, staring at the glowing veins that now spread into the town itself. The Frost King's words echoed in her mind. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the ice. This time, the frost didn't burn her. It welcomed her. She knelt, placing her hands on the surface, and felt the veins respond, their light growing brighter. The cracks closed, and the ghosts faded. But Sam knew this was only the beginning. The balance was fragile, and it would take all her strength to keep it intact. Sam was no longer just a scientist, no longer just a curious explorer. She was the keeper of the ice veins, bound to their power for as long as the cold endured. And in Black Hollow, the cold never truly left. It's December, and I am stuck in a constant state of irritation and perpetual wincing at the mere mention of jolly old Nick, the happy festivities, and the hope of a snow-filled Christmas. And who can forget about the biting cold? But there is nothing happy, at least not for me. I am not a holiday person. Don't call me Scrooge or the Grinch. They at least got some heart to them at the end of those stories. This is not such a story. I work a monotonous job, hour after hour spent hunched over a desk, day after day. And at the end of those days, which often turned into late nights to finish the work of those that made more money than me, and still took the credit, meant I, in turn, often missed my bus to get home. So, I found myself at the quaint antique shop where my bus would stop in front of, filled with shelves and shelves of obscure and unique trinkets and books. Searching through these shelves of spoils of the past and the people they had come from. "You seem to favor that one," I heard a soft voice sing from behind me. I turned to find the source and found the sweet shop owner standing behind me. Yes, there was something I did favor. The shop owner was a woman who looked to be in her late 30s with curly black flowing hair. She was beautiful and often let me browse without ever buying anything, especially on cold nights when the bus was running late. Had I developed a crush? Maybe missed my bus on purpose once or twice? I can say yes now, can allow myself to admit there was something there. Like I had known her, seen her somewhere else before. But I knew she was referring to the book currently opened in my hands. I like a good read. I shrug and close the book. "How did you learn Latin?" she asks casually, turning to rearrange a few trinkets on one of the shelves behind her. I looked at her confused and lifted the book in my hands to reread the title, the front cover now showing the title of the book in Latin, the Magni Molly, or, as I had read earlier, the Grandest Evil. I quickly opened the book to a random page, coincidentally the same page I had been looking at before, and found the pages in English. A mismatched cover, perhaps. The inside of the book is English text. She muses to herself. "Ah, right. So, all the books for your reading pleasure, and you always choose this one. Something interesting." I look down to the page I find myself reading every time I come to the store. The Demon of Desire. Demonium desiderae, she says. Again Latin. She turns to face me then, and gently holds one half of the book up, while I hold the other. The Demon of Desire, first a human given the power to conjure anything he willed, turned by a dark witch's love as he burned for heresy, takes the form of what will suit it best as it seeks out innocents to corrupt, by seducing them with their deepest desire, at a price. She stops reading suddenly and hums, "If you could have anything you ever wanted, and all you had to do was lose a little blood, would you?" The question that should have rung alarm bells in my head like a distorted version of the bells those jolly old Nicks out there use when seeking donations. It should have made me run, and I could chalk it up to the winter air locking my legs in place. But really, like I said, I had grown to like the small little shop on the bus stop corner, and its beautiful shop owner. "I beg your pardon?" I had finally found the words to speak again. She simply smiled and walked to the front of her shop to go behind the counter and push aside a long red velvet curtain with gold accents that hid another room. How hadn't I ever noticed that before? I looked down at the book again, wondering how bad losing a little blood could really be if I could get everything I wanted. Busting my ass at work wasn't doing the trick after all. I placed the book back on the shelf and decided to follow the shop owner to the counter. She returned from behind the curtain and placed a small rectangle box on the counter. She gestured for me to open it, and in the box was an equally beautiful gold pen. But unlike the other trinkets, those that showed wear and tear, a history of life, this pen looked brand new. I had become mesmerized by the pen, not realizing the sweet shop owner had been talking this whole time until I looked up at her again. A gift, a good luck charm maybe, the woman was saying. I looked at her puzzled as she pushed the pen closer in my direction, always missing the bus in this cold, for example. And how is a pen to help me with that? She shrugged. I suppose it depends on your level of faith. Faith in what? Exactly? I picked the pen up, enjoyed the slight heaviness and sleekness of it resting in my palm. Magic, she said simply, like I should have known this all along. I laughed, but tried to stifle it with a cough when I noticed she was frowning slightly, and if I don't believe in magic, well, I'll have to fix that one eye, she said with a small smile while pushing a blank piece of paper toward me. So what? I write down what I want with this pen and I get it? I thought this was an antique shop, not a magic shop, I replied amused, twirling the pen in my hand before clicking the top of the pen and wincing in pain. I heard the thud as it fell to the countertop. I watched as blood droplets pooled out of my thumb and fell onto the page. What the hell was that? I said sharply, looking up quickly while she rushed to find a tissue under her counter. She wrapped it around my thumb, and suddenly it felt like the air around me slowed, and I could only feel her hand wrapped around my own. Then, all too quickly, I smelled the slight must of the shop and heard the light pattering of rain starting to fall against the shop windows. It needs your blood to write. Go on, she whispers, and her eyes flicker to mine, beautiful small marbles of abyss staring back at me. I was surprised, not because I followed her suggestion, but because my body didn't stop me. No goosebumps, no red flags waving frantically as I picked up the pen and watched it write, or rather, bleed. I want the bus to arrive now and wait for me to board. A sudden dizziness overtook me before a bright light outside the shop window further blinded my vision. Then I realized it was a bus turning the corner and stopping in front of the shop. Doors open, almost like it was waiting for me to board. I laughed without humor, suddenly wondering how long I had been in this shop. It felt like hours. Coincidence, I muttered unconvincingly to myself. Magic, maybe. The shop owner offered with a satisfied grin. She places the pen back in the box and slides it to me. Yours, for the taking. Happy holidays, Christopher. She moves quickly behind the red curtain, while I look down at the box. How did you know my name? I call out suddenly, but receive no reply. I move to the front door, though each step feels heavy and sluggish, as if something is holding me back. I turn once again to the box and hurry to pick it up before heading out into the rain, running to the bus, which is still waiting. Once home, I take the pen out of my jacket pocket and place it on my bedside table. I try to forget about it while changing out of my work clothes, but I can't get the image of the shop owner out of my mind. I can still feel the prick of the pen and the change in air. I sit at the edge of my bed and stare at the box. A part of me, one that scares even me, wants to open it, see what it can really do. Coincidence, I mutter to myself again before leaving the box where it is and turning the light off to try and fall asleep. Now I rarely dream or remember my dreams, but tonight is different. I can feel the air on my exposed arms, feel my feet dig into a black sanded beach. I can smell vanilla and clementine trailing away from me and see the back of a beautiful woman. This scent is most familiar, but I'm unsure where or who it's from. I feel the pricks of sand clinging to my feet, ankles and parts of my legs when I stand. The woman is waiting for me, so I follow. I can't see her face, and her words are slurred and sound far away. But what I do catch forces a heavy pit to sit in my stomach. Cursed lovers. What did this mean? Were we lovers? Cursed, and for what reason? She reaches for my hand and I wince, looking down to see some blood falling from it, but no cut in sight. Give unto me your memories, death seeks to bury. In every life I search for you. Remember me, my lovely corruption, remember me. I heard her plea now. I could feel something pulling me away. And though we desperately tried to cling to each other, it wasn't enough. I was pulled toward the ocean, felt the cold wrap around my ankles and draw me under. I could taste the salt water and flailed my arms around for any kind of help. I awoke to find myself standing, drenched in sweat instead of seawater, and to my horror, felt the same heavy sleekness of the pen in my hand, blood dripping from my thumb, and on my wall, my handwriting, my blood. I want to remember who I was. I didn't touch the pen the remainder of the night. Though I wanted nothing to do with it, I also couldn't be away from it. Instead, I settled on the floor by my bedroom door and didn't move, using it to keep myself propped up and awake. I stared and stared at the wall, trying to remember when I had gotten up to grab and use the pen. I didn't need to remember who I was. I was me. I was home, and it was just a bad dream. But the writing on the wall proved it wasn't just a dream, and that something was happening. Who am I then? I whispered to myself, my eyelids slowly dropping from the heaviness of lack of sleep. Again, I dreamed. Only this time I was not on a beach. This time I watched a man in what looked like 16th century attire sitting at a wooden table, pages and pages full of red ink, the same gold pen in his hand. My body moved closer on its own will, and I realized the pages weren't full of red ink but blood. That this man was me. But how? Then suddenly, I heard yelling and banging on his door. The man rushed to scribble down more words before the door was broken down, and a riot of angry townspeople rushed in to grab the man by his arms and force him out of the room. Those that had stayed behind lit fire to his room and the papers. I watched the pen disappear. The words I caught repeated over and over chilled me to the bone. I want them to bend to my will or suffer under it. I followed the angry townspeople out of the burning room, the fire quickly dancing from room to room before engulfing the whole home. I could feel the fire licking at my exposed feet when exiting, followed by the dampness of the grass outside. It had rained, but it had cleansed nothing. Beloved, I watch a woman scream, her frame oddly the same as the woman from the beach, the same following hair. She watches in horror as the man is tied to pikes. Dry grass and bark left at his feet. She moves to stand with him, but is pulled back by a sneering man that intends to force her to watch. Keep it safe. Avenge me. Curse them, for they have cursed us. He roars, not taking his eyes off his beloved, and somehow I know he means the pen. I see someone light a new flame, while the woman mutters quickly to herself. Dust to dust, I summon thee. Dust to dust, I set you free. Come to me, darkness of destiny. Fill my love with demon leprosy. Bay. Suddenly the man's eyes turn black, and a wicked smile forms at his lips. The villagers are yelling, condemning him for his crimes against nature. Crimes that began to fill my mind like my own memory with scenes of stolen fortunes, the enjoyment of the slow kill against those who had treated him as deficient, mediocre. Then I watch the flame in slow motion being thrown, but cannot bear to watch it land at his feet. The screams after were enough, Or was it laughter? And suddenly, I felt as if my flesh were his. I was burning too. Abruptly, I awake again. Though unmoved from my spot at my bedroom door. I can still feel the flames on my skin, though uncharred. There will be no sleep tonight. I can feel the bags under my eyes, but push myself to throw on my clothes from earlier and grab the pen. I look down at it and notice my blood, which had been filling the chamber, once red, now oozing black. How I had made it back to the shop, to her, is anyone's guess. But there I stood, watching the flicker of a few candles in her window. I had hoped this too was a dream, that I would not find the shop door open. But I felt the cold pierce my palm as I grabbed the knob and turned it to walk inside. Back so soon. I heard her voice, but did not see her anywhere. Suddenly, the few candles spread about turned off and left no light, aside from a faint glow coming from behind the red curtain. I pulled the curtain back to find a small table surrounded by shelves of more books, these ancient and sacred, along with herbs and candles. On the table is a small cauldron, and I watch her, suddenly mesmerized and dizzy. Something about this again seems familiar. She takes a small bag, tying various herbs together, and what looks to be the bloodied napkin from earlier when I first used the pen, to put inside of it. Lemongrass, Datura stramonium, and, she pauses, drawing a small dagger from the table and slicing her finger to let a few drops stain the green of the herbs. Some blood. She drops it into the cauldron, mumbling under her breath before a fire starts and begins to burn the bag. I step back slightly bewildered, but the fire, though small, is intense, and I can't look away. My eyes burn as I begin to see images, memories dancing and flickering in the fire. Of me, of her. A life, or rather, lives together. Centuries of chaos and destruction, and her beautiful smile. Then, a dark shadow emerges from the fire, and I am helpless to its hold over me. The way it settles into me, like old skin. Took long enough. Welcome back, DZDIT. It's getting harder and harder to bring you back to me. To make you remember. You must be hungry. And in this time, there are so many souls' desires to feast upon. Just a signature away, she says softly, putting her hand out as I watch the pen materialize in her palm. I look at her and feel my lips stretch out into a smirk before catching a glance of myself in the mirror hanging between two shelves. The face staring back at me is mine, but the eyes, they're his, and I too welcome him home again.